На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. This week we've got a packed show with a new managerial incoming in the RPL at Dynamo, a whole host of European fixtures, Rostov's crazy transfer market, and a review of both the senior and under-21 Sbornaya sides' recent games. Joining me this week once again is Richard Pike.
Good evening, everybody. How are we all?
And David Sansun.
Hello. I'm not too bad, thanks, Richard.
Yeah, I'm not too bad either. We'll be later on joined by a special guest, Ben Jackson from the Belgian Football Podcast, to just discuss things all Brugge ahead of the game with Zenit next midweek. Now, the international break first, though, took centre stage once again over the weekend. This time, Russia played 3 games in just 6 days. First up was a friendly, a 2-1 loss against Sweden at the VEB Arena, which we covered last week. And then in the Nations League, Russia drew with Turkey 1-1 and 0-0 with Hungary, both at the VTB Arena. Now, Russia still currently tops their group, but could have wrapped it all up if not for, frankly, a pair of quite disappointing results, given their form over the past few years. Now, throughout the game, Sanya Sobolev clinched his first goal for Russia, while Anton Maranchuk continued to shine in a first-team role for Sbornaya in the absence of his brother Sasha and Alexander Golovin. Now, Richard, what did you think about the games in general? And perhaps do you think that Stani Cherchesov's penchant for defensive and ageing squad selections has finally caught up with him?
I think so, yes. I didn't see the games, but the results are not great, are they? And you've got to ask yourself the question now, is it time for some freshening up of this team? You see some of the squad selections, and Yuri Zhirkov's still getting into the team. Kudryashov. You just wonder, don't you? Is it time now to freshen it up a little bit? Not too good results. No, it has to be stressed. It's a real missed opportunity too, isn't it? Because they'd have won at least one of those games. They'd have been looking in a great position to, with a win and a draw in their final 2 games, clinch top spot and get a seeding for, the 2022 World Cup qualification. It has to be stressed. That's not a good pair of results. And maybe coming into November when they have another Nations League game and a friendly against Moldova, maybe that's then the time maybe to look at freshening it up a little bit. I mean, we know Cherchesov is quite, obviously, he's a little bit stubborn sometimes with his squad selection. I'm beginning to think, is it not time, for a bit of a freshen up? But I've got to be honest. I must say though, the Nations League this week, it was in general a bit of a struggle, wasn't it? 'Cause a lot of the games around the place were not particularly entertaining. I mean, Denmark versus England, it was only decided by a penalty.
Yeah.
France drew 0-0 with Portugal, and it does make you wonder with the Nations League, doesn't it? Are the games a bit drab because the sides are quite equal and the same? You're not getting, at least if you get 2 sides of varying quality playing against each other, you sometimes at least get goals and some entertainment, whereas the sides too evenly matched by pairing up. It's a good idea in theory by UEFA, but it just seemed a bit like, I mean, obviously I didn't see the games, but it seems a bit like the team's a bit too matched up, too even. I think a freshen up in a couple of areas could be on the cards for the next round of international matches.
Yeah, I think the Nations League suffers from that weird middle syndrome where neither is it really a proper tournament nor a friendly. So a lot of teams are quite defensive. Because they don't want to lose. It's because it matters quite a bit in terms of potential playoffs, getting in Group A again and then the next year, but it's also at the end of the day, it's like a posh friendly where experimentation does happen. Lots of players who don't really play together end up playing. I mean, well, in most teams apart from Russia, because it's the same squad all the time. But I digress. And to be quite honest, I agree, because most of the teams are actually very evenly matched. It makes for good development. It means that players can come in and be getting experience at young ages or whatever at very raw periods in the career and get good and proper experience. But because of that, it's really not a spectacle to watch whatsoever. And with Russia in particular, the squad, in my opinion, is a big issue with the current problems that the team play. Now, I don't want to over-accentuate these because they are still top of the group in what is a pretty solid group and pretty close group. But the squad is too old and most simply are not good enough. You've got players who are either not playing for the club or completely out of form. Yuri Zhirkov's at 37 now, and he's one of 11 players in the original squad over the age of 30. Now, of course, there is the other side of the coin to this, and there is a shining light at the end of the tunnel. Now, Russia under-21s, led by Mikhail Galaktianov, have just qualified for next summer's European Under-21 Championship, with arguably what is the most prosperous generation in recent memory. And without naming all of the players right now, essentially the squad's brimming with talent and regular RPL starters, as all who listen would know. Now, over the weekend, they defeated Estonia 4-0 Luzhniki, thanks to a brace from Fedor Chalov, a goal by Konstantin Kachayev and an own goal. And then they dispatched Latvia 4-1 quite easily at the Arena Khimki, with another Kachayev goal, followed by others from Pasha Maslov, Danila Savoy, and Alexander Lomavitsky. So, David, you watched the under-21 games. So, how do you think the young side fared?
I did. Obviously, 2 easy games there to round out the group. In the last international break, they played Poland and lost. It was their first loss of the whole campaign. But they needed 2 wins here, and they got a big helping hand as Serbia took some points off Poland, who were their nearest team, to challenge them for the top spot. And all they had to do then was go out and beat Latvia in the final game. Both games are comfortable. The Estonia game was really comfortable. They were cruising. The Siska boys, Tiknisian, Kachayev, Chalov, Obliakov, they were all fantastic in that game. I think every goal was scored by a Siska player up in the own goal. And 2 of them were assisted by Siska players as well. They were all on top form that day. It was a strange one at right back. Right back seems to be the questionable position right now. Roskazov obviously wasn't called up because of his lack of game time of late. So you had Alton Golubev playing there from Ufa, who's obviously normally a midfielder. But he did a good job at right back. The first game was solid, and then Matvey Safonov obviously got called up to the national team because Guillaume was out. So next match, the only real change was Maximenko came in and started in goal. Safonov had been the first choice goalie for the under-21s for most of the qualifying campaign. Trickier game, they still had the lead at half time, but just 1-0. But they took control in the second half. They got Yevgeniev scored off a free kick, and then they got a goal, the next goal very soon afterwards from Lesavoy. At that point, they sort of relaxed a bit, made a few subs. We saw Makarov from Rubin come on and make his debut at that level. So, the squad's still improving with players like Makarov coming through. They did a good job. It's a good generation of players we've got there who are going to go and play in the Euros next summer.
Now, on to that, playing in the Euros next summer, this current under-21 squad is probably not far behind the first team in terms of current talent, and many of which you could argue would be regulars in the first team. But in Russia, traditionally, large swathes of players do all graduate from the first team together, such as the 2008 generation, as they are known as, who all graduated from a highly successful 2001 to 2003 side with Arshavin, Pavlyuchenko, Berezutsky brothers, Akinfeev, Malafeev, Ignashevich, Pogrebniak, Oleg Kuzmin, and Denis Kolodin, all featuring in this time frame. And then if you fast forward to 2008, half of the current side actually played, including Zhanayev, Shunin, Kudryashov, Smolov, Ayanov, all featured together, as well as the Kombarov twins, Viktor Faizulin, and so on. So you do see in Russia traditionally this big batch of players come through. Now, David, you mentioned the Euros next summer, the Under-21 Euros. Do you expect this to happen soon, this big batch of players to graduate from the Under-21s into the first team, perhaps after this Under-21 Euros? And is this why there seems to be such parity between the two sides right now?
Yeah, there definitely seems to be some preference from the higher ups to keep that group together. Only 3 of the squad Safonov, Chalov, and Obliakov have had call-ups to the first team, and the bulk of the squad, therefore, they're not all really young. The bulk of the squad are 21, 22, a couple of 20-year-olds, and not many younger than that. So once the tournament's over, barely any of those guys are going to be even eligible for the under-21s. So at that stage, it's time for them to be called up to the senior team and step it up, or go into that stage of nothingness where they're going to get potentially left out for the elderly players, or are they going to be given the chance? With Cherchesov in charge, you're going to think, we're going to keep seeing Ionov playing instead of Lestevoy, for example. Granted, he's given Mostovoy his chance. Mostovoy played in every game during the international break. His first caps for the national side, younger player at least. So yeah, you'd expect a good chunk of that squad to graduate, and the top players at least. We'd be expecting the two goalkeepers, Safonov, Maximenko. We'd be expecting Deveyev to probably challenge Obliakov. Obviously, he's been called up. Chalov's been called up. Chalov will have a hard task considering Russia's preference for a big man up front, like Zuba or Sobolev, who seems like a ready-made replacement almost. So, there's plenty of guys there who are fit to challenge, and ready to take the place of the old guys in the squad. It'll be interesting to see how many of them get given the chance.
Yeah, certainly. Of course, that the idea that all these lads get put together is predicated upon theory more than anything, and hope. And I do hope, I agree, that a lot of these younger lads get the opportunity sooner rather than later, because there are just too many players in the first team who are well past it. Now, Richard, do you want to come in on the under-21s here?
Yeah, just to also offer my congratulations to them for qualifying for the Euros. It's a fantastic achievement, and I certainly echo your thoughts that this is one of the strongest under-21 sides that they've had. Their record in this tournament of qualifying for it in recent years has not been great. So for them to qualify quite comfortably in the end, really, with only one loss from 10 games, is impressive testament to Galaktionov and his squad. And I do concur that I think a decent chunk of this squad will graduate to the senior team after the Euros. And I think, whilst you could make the argument that in some areas the under-21 squad is just as strong as the senior squad at the moment, I think it makes sense to keep this group together, because the more that they get playing with each other, they more become familiar with each other's game, and then after the Euros, like David was saying, you can then bring them all in, which I think will be a good move, because often the big problem with international football is because you only play it every now and again. It's difficult to get the same fluidity as in club football. Whereas if you get all this group playing together and you can bring them in batches, like not just one or two, but 4, 5, 6 in a row, all getting called up to the senior squad afterwards, there's that extra level of continuity. So I think we'll see that after the Euros. I think definitely seeing one or two positions, some reinforcements, and also Igor Diveyev has still got to come back into that side as well. So that'll strengthen the defence even further, and possibly even solve the problematic right back situation, like you were saying. They could put Maslov there. So want to extend my congratulations to the under-21s and to Galaktionov.
Yes, absolutely. It's surprising that when you look at the long-term results of the under-21s qualifying for this competition, this is actually the first time that they've done so since the 1998. And David wrote a piece for the website which was published yesterday, that just going into more detail about the under-21s and the composition of the team and how it's their golden generation. And it has to be Russia's golden generation, because this is probably the best batch of youngsters we've had since 1990, when a variety of players like Igor Shalamov, Andrei Piernitsky, Alexander Mostovoy, Andrei Kanchelskis, Andriy Bal, Igor Kolivanov all came together at the same time, and that was Soviet Union. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, this has to be the greatest concentration of under-21 talent we've seen in Russia. So the RFU are doing something right, at least. So to move back to the RPL, there's been a little bit of a crazy breaking news event in Rostov in just the last hour, who have actually confirmed 5 different transfers in less than an hour officially. So to work through them, first of all, the transfer of Alexei Ionov to Krasnodar on a 3-year deal for a fee. And then secondly, that promising defender Dima Chistyakov has joined Zenit on loan. And then 3 incomings. Going the other way from Zenit to Rostov is Denis Terentiev in a permanent deal. And then the last 2 transfers are a pair of Swedes, young Swedes actually, 18-year-old Armin Gigovic and 21-year-old Pontus Almqvist, who were signed from Helsingborg and Norrköping respectively. And that's reportedly in the Russian press as a combined fee of 7 million euros, both of which on 5-year deals, so they're obviously ones for the future. But David, these 2 Swedish lads are supposed to be highly rated. Do you think it could be possibly with one eye on the now as well as looking ahead?
Well, yeah, it's been Rostov's sort of modus operandi, hasn't it, for a while to go out and, especially in Scandinavia, try and pick up some younger players. Obviously, they've done it in the past with Zika Dunic, and they've done it in the past with Norman. And I have to admit, I hadn't heard of either of these 2 guys before today. I've done as much as I can to quickly research both players. Gigovic seems to be the more highly rated of the 2 and the younger of the 2. And looks like potentially they could be preparing for Norman to leave the club come January. He said it over the international break himself. In an interview when he was with the Norwegian squad, that he's ready to take the next step. And obviously, in the summer window, we RFN had word from the agents of Norman. They were looking to move him on once they dropped out of Europe. Obviously, it didn't happen. So he'll be sticking around for now. But that departure seems imminent. So yeah, it's no surprise to see it happen. Rostov, they've just lost Ionov, so the other guy, Almqvist, seems like maybe a direct replacement for him. But they'd made so many sales already this window, with money coming in for Shmorodov, and then Ionov on top of that. Whoever else they'd sold, I forget. So they obviously had money knocking around it, and they've gone out and invested it. And if they can do what they've done with players like Shmorodov, or what they're going to do with Norman, who both of those came in for probably less than 3 million combined. Shmorodov went out for almost 8 million euros, and Norman's probably going to go out for 10 million euros plus. If they can do that again with these 2 guys, then they're going to be starting to work on a nice business model of bringing and developing players who are ready to make the next step up in Europe. So yeah, promising signs that they're still being managed quite well, even though we were questioning their transfer window for most of the summer, we're considering their lack of activity and then sales. But hopefully it works out for them.
Yeah, and this Rostov experiment, maybe not an experiment anymore, but a proven track record, to be frank, of looking towards the Scandinavian market has really went on for quite a few years now, 3 or 4 years. And it's within this period that they kind of switched tact from looking towards once the Russian players sort of in their twilight of their career, and foreign stars in the twilight of their career, and the switch tack to bringing in young foreign players, like you said, from developing players from developing European leagues. And Scandinavia has been a particular focus point. Sverri Ingason, Ragnar Sigurdsson, Vidar Kjartansson. I mean, on top of that, the 2 or 3 that you already mentioned, as well as, it just shows that these developing European leagues is a very good standing point for teams like Rostov, like Ufa, like smaller RPL teams to find a bargain out there, a real bargain. And it's hopefully more good scouting from Rostov's point of view. But one of the interesting moves, in my opinion, is the departure of Dima Chistyakov. Now he's joined Zenit on loan. Of course, Chistyakov was one of Rostov's best performers last season and was waylaid by injury until very recently. But I think it could be a very shrewd signing. Richard, what do you think of the move in general?
I'm with you on that, James. I think it is a very shrewd sign. I think it was pretty clear that even though a creative midfield player was in, like Wendell, was needed, I think as well as then it also probably lacked a bit of depth at central defence. Because at times this season, when they've got Lovren and Rakitsky obviously as the starting 2, But then behind that, they've only really got Danila Prokin, who at 19, whilst he's shown some talent so far, he's still, not really ready yet to be starting on a frequent basis in case, one of Rakitsky or Lovren got injured. They've had to play Douglas Santos there at centre half on a couple of occasions, and he's done all right there. But it's always nice to have a third centre half, and especially with them having to play in 3 different competitions. So they've had to thicken up their squad in other areas by signing Kuzyaev and Vendel for the midfield, and I think thickening up the defence with Chichakov is a smart move. I think he actually was at Zenit originally as a youth team player, I think, and he obviously then had to go away, and he's played at Tambov and Rostov. And last year at Rostov, he was really, really good in the first 22 games of the year when Rostov were flying high, playing well. First 20 odd games of the year, sorry, when they were doing well, flying high in the league. He was a pivotal part of that, and then he got injured towards the end of the year, and that's when the challenge sort of fell off a cliff. Well, they still managed to finish 5th, but they were pushing up towards the Champions League places, even in 3rd place. So, no, I think this is a smart signing from Zenit. He's not going to displace either Lovren or Rakitsky, but it's just one of those Russian players as well who's useful to have around in the squad. It sorts out a gap in the squad. He's a reliable performer. And I think it's a nice, shrewd piece of business from Zenit. It thickens up the squad a little bit in a key area. So, it's a trial before you buy option. They've got an option to buy. I think it's around 4 million euros if they exercise the purchase option. So, if he does a good enough job in the cup competitions and after the European games, then he's be a good acquisition, relatively cheap for them. So, and it pans out their squad. So, I'm in agreement with you. It's a very shrewd move.
And what isn't a shrewd move, I must admit, I don't think is the transfer of Alexei Yanov to Krasnodar. It's what's reported to be a 3-year deal. Well, it is a 3-year deal, and reportedly for a couple of million. Now that's just absolutely crazy from Krasnodar, and it smacks of panic buying. To be frank, they know they need depth in their squad. They're stuck at 8 with the foreigner limit, unable to move others, unable to sign people that would like to bring in. And obviously they brought in Yanov for his experience and to fill a body in the weekend squads after Champions League games. Now, last week and 2 weeks ago, I implored them to do exactly this. Fine. But Alexei Yanov is not going to be much use, I'm afraid. He's well past his best. He's performed terribly for Rostov this season. Only scored his first goal the weekend before the international break, and has been really poorly underperforming. It's just absolute madness that you see the 33-now-year-old Yanov available and fine, but then you've got Anton Zinkovsky banging them in for Krylia in the Fina L. Played excellent, was one of the highest assist creators in the RPL last season. Reportedly going to Kimki for 500,000 euros. I don't know how a progressive and well-run club like Krasnodar can look at those 2 transfers and think, oh, Yanov at a couple of million is definitely the one you want to go to. So I'm not particularly fond of that one, and from Krasnodar's point of view, but for Rostov to get money for a 32-year-old is quite frankly very good. Richard, what do you think about Yanov?
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. I'm really shocked that they've gone for him. I think Zinkovsky would have been a better purchase, more long term at 24. Zinkovsky did very well in the relegated team last season. It would have made much more sense too. Zinkovsky's not going to start all the time for Krasnodar. They have a decent amount, their starting wingers are very good in Vanderson and Klaassen, but, as a backup option, somebody to come off the bench, I'd been more infused by him than Ionov. Yeah, I actually think Rostov have done very well. They've offloaded Shamuradov for 8 million, couple of million for Ionov. Big wages off the payroll, and that the young one of the young Swedish guys that they've signed. He's a right winger, so he'll come straight in for Ionov. So yeah, I think in a way Rostov have done a good deal there, and it's baffling from Krasnodar. I totally agree with you, James. Baffling transfer that.
I have been a little bit harsh on Ionov, but I can never ever get behind a deal like that, going for the older, grizzled veteran when such an exciting young talent who could be the backbone of a club for such a long time is available for frankly nothing. Now,
Yeah,
if we're going to move away from to move away from the RPL, is moving back to the UCL, as the Champions League returns on Tuesday, and Zenit host Club Brugge in St. Petersburg. To discuss the visitors, we're joined this week by Ben Jackson of the Belgian Football Podcast, next up on RFN. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I'm quite excited. Looking forward to the game tomorrow. For those listening, this is the night before regular recording, and Belgium, England, and Russia are all just about to kick off. So, pretty exciting night, actually. And speaking of Belgium, the national team have been a bogey side of late for Russia. And, well, to be frank, they've been that good. They're probably most international teams' bogey side right now. But how is the game progressing domestically in Belgium? Are any of the top sides ready to compete in the UCL?
Not really, to be honest. Like, that's kind of like a basic answer. I think obviously Bruges they're clearly the best team in Belgium, and they're the closest, I'd say, to being ready to compete. Like, they'll be competitive, but they're not ready, in my opinion, to kind of push further than the group stages. The other team that were up for qualification, I guess you could say, were Ghent, and they were absolutely destroyed by Dynamo Kiev. They just looked a level below. I think they looked like a Europa League team, maybe even worse. So they're kind of like, they finished second place in the league last year, and they just weren't anywhere near. I guess another side that listeners would have heard about would have been Anderlecht, and they used to be one of the bigger teams in Belgium, but financial mismanagement, all that sort of stuff, I'd probably say 2-3 years away from actually getting into Europe at the moment. Their squad's just not ready for it at all. So, yeah, the rest of the bigger teams in Belgium are kind of like Europa League level, I'd say. But Bruges are definitely like the only team that I'd kind of want to see in the Champions League at the moment, because the other ones just wouldn't be as competitive, and it'd be a bit of a struggle for them, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's a little bit funny because, I mean, with no disrespect to Belgian football domestically, it's probably around the similar level of Russian in that it's the sort of Group B, where you like to call it RFN of European leagues, where it's nowhere near the level of the top five. And interestingly, Russia's the opposite, where we have one or two teams who we probably think could compete quite well in the Champions League, but then everybody else would really struggle. In the Europa League this year, CSKA went straight through to the group stages, of course, but Dynamo and Rostov both lost in the playoffs to Lokomotiv Tbilisi and Maccabi Haifa, like teams that you, on paper, you would probably expect them to beat, but they were just terribly underperforming. So it's interesting to hear that little dichotomy where there's only really one at that level, where, I mean, Zenit are probably, you would expect them to get through the group stages if they get a good draw, but it doesn't go much further down than that, to be frank. But those at Zenit media teams have called this group a very Zenit group, where by this they mean that both a little bit aggrieved at not getting a bigger name tie, without any disrespect to any of the sides that they have drawn, but it's also quite an even group. And as we've seen often in recent years, from Zenit's perspective, like last season, they've had a group where they could feasibly finish anywhere between first and fourth, and you would expect probably most of the teams in that group to do so. Now, in my opinion here, it's clear Dortmund top, and then it's quite close for the other three who could get behind them. It could qualify in second. Now, Bruges have never qualified beyond the group stages in the modern Champions League, if I'm correct in that. And Zenit see Bruges as, to be honest, eminently winnable games, especially at home with the home record. So, Ben, how do you expect Bruges to perform? Could they get through to the knockouts? And do you think that Zenit being disrespectful, perhaps, in thinking that way?
I'm not sure. Yeah, when the draw was made, I kind of saw that very similar style group to what Zenit had last season. Like, you've got those Lazio, Zenit, and Bruges who could all beat each other. I think Bruges are probably the weakest side of those three for sure. I think they've got less like Champions League experience, but I expect them to still be competitive in every single game. Like last year, they had quite a tricky group again, but they managed to finish third, got into the Europa League, and that included a point away at Real Madrid, where I don't know if people watched that game. It was quite a ridiculous game. They went 2-0 up, and they really should have won, but then they went down to 10 men and like ended up 2-2. So they shown signs last year, but they didn't actually win a single game. They got 3 points, and Galatasaray were just useless, so they were just like finished above them, which was quite nice. But yeah, I think they'll be competitive. We were speaking about it on our podcast and just in our chats the other day. Like, we just don't really know what to expect from Lazio. They're kind of like this team that we're like, they could be the team that almost like pipped Juventus last season, but they could also be the team that out after the COVID break was just absolutely terrible, really, and just completely fell away. So like, and I've also got this like kind of sneaky suspicion that Dortmund are going to throw one away, and I feel like if Bruges, I just feel like it could be Bruges. I feel like they're the sort of team that Dortmund just randomly lose to in Germany, like a similar sort of level. So yeah, I expect them to at least win one game, maybe at home, or even I think they could win away depending on how they set up for all the games. But if they can make it into the Europa League, I think fans should probably be quite happy with that. I think as well as for Belgium, they need kind of wins for the coefficient rankings and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm hoping they finish third, but I'm not massively optimistic about their chances.
Yeah, I think that's quite understandable, to be honest. And I agree entirely that Lazio are the dark horse in this, and that I also don't have a clue in how they would perform. And as I mentioned earlier, it is for me Dortmund and then any of the other three. Of course, last time Zenit played Dortmund, they actually lost 5-4 on aggregate and won the second leg in Dortmund. So Zenit are one of those teams where they could easily get trounced 5-0 off Dortmund and beat them 5-0. It's just how it goes their way on the day. But Bruges' current manager is Philippe Clement, and I believe he is a club legend at Bruges.
Yeah, no, yeah, he's one of their club legends, and he's actually only been in the job for a season. So yeah, he had a pretty good start. They were way ahead in the league when it was cut off last year, so he's certainly been a success. And that's even without, they've kind of really struggled, probably kind of the opposite to Zenit. They don't really have a striker. That's been one of their biggest problems. So he's kind of molded this team and built this team and playing this style of football without kind of like an out and out goal scoring striker. So the wingers are really important to score. The midfielders are really important to score. He likes to play like a 4-3-3 formation. Domestically, they like to push up. They like to play on the front foot. They like to press. I don't know how he's going to fare in the Champions League. Obviously, he had success last year in that Madrid game and a couple of the other games, but he didn't manage to win a game. But I don't think he'll ever be judged on what happens in the Champions League. I think it's domestically where he's going to be judged. So, yeah, I'm interested to see, because you have obviously there's kind of like a trend of these club legends being put in charge of teams, and then quite a few of them are just completely rubbish. Whereas he's clearly not. He clearly he's got managerial experience from before. I think he was manager of Genk a few years ago and stuff. So yeah, a good first season in charge. Slightly more difficult this season. They're still looking for that striker, and I don't think he's quite worked out who his striker is yet. There's a couple of options, but yeah, no, he's done a very good job so far, and I think he should definitely be there for the end of this season.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that with the old club legend sort of in charge of the club, whereas Zenit have actually done the opposite, where they have went for the foreign coach and the big name of obviously before Semak, who is a club legend right now, and that is actually, to be fair to him, doing brilliant with Zenit. Before that was Mancini, Lucescu, Villas-Boas, Luciano Spalletti, Advocat. Now this is the first permanent Russian manager that Zenit have had since 2002, I believe, which is Boris Rappaport. So it's a very long time, and it's interesting that they went the opposite route to that. And the funny thing is about Philippe Clement is that I actually largely remember him most for a spell at Coventry under Gordon Strachan in the late 90s. Now, I don't believe it was very successful, to be honest, but I mean, it was under Strachan, so let's not put all the blame on him right there. But I hear how you mentioned that the wingers are very important to Bruges' side. Now, for the first game, Zenit's first choice left back, and frankly, who one of the best players of since he signed is in Douglas Santos is actually suspended. So either youngster Danilo Klugovoy, who, as the listeners know, is very exciting but very inexperienced, would be making his debut at this level, could deputise, or 37-year-old Yuri Zhirkov could get the Zimmer frame out and find his way onto the pitch. So who are Bruges' danger men, and could anyone in particular take advantage of this situation in Zenit's defence?
Yeah, I think Bruges will certainly be hoping it's Yuri Zhirkov that comes out. Although again, we were speaking about this the other day. We were like, you look at Yuri Zhirkov, you're like, oh, it's an old player, not much pace left, all that. But there's that know-how and experience, so you just can never really count these players out. But if he does play and he isn't on his game and he does look completely off the pace, then Bruges' best player this season for sure has been Klepin Diatta. He's 21-year-old Senegalese winger who's he's really good, really, really good. I think it's simple way of saying it. Lots of people were kind of, when they thought of Bruges and like wingers last season, it was all about Emmanuel Dennis. And he was linked with loads of moves over the summer, but he doesn't even get in the starting 11 at the moment. It's all basically the players through Diatta. He is their like goal scoring winger, basically. And he's probably their biggest attacking threat. And I think without Douglas Santos, I think that is definitely an area where Bruges maybe could have an advantage and could take advantage of. But outside of that, you have the duo, the midfield duo, Van Aken and Vormer. Van Aken is just, he's one of the best players in the Belgian league. He plays for the national team sometimes as well. Not first choice. He plays in like their friendly second string teams, but quality player, can find the net, can find a pass. Same with Vormer. Really good energy. They kind of like drive the team, get the team going, drive them forward. But again, I'm not too sure how effective they will be in the Champions League because they like to have the ball. They like to play make. And I just don't know if Bruges are going to have that much of the ball. So I think another player, probably my favourite player that they've got is Clinton Mata. So he's an Angolan right back, or he can play in a back three. And he won their Player of the Season last year. I think he won League Player of the Year as well. Quality defender. I think he's going to be key for them throughout this Champions League campaign. Like they kind of go how he goes. And him and Diatta actually work really well in tandem, like pushing and pressing together and then dropping in, like going forward. So I think for this game especially, I think Diatta will be the key player. We are slightly concerned on the podcast because Simon Deli is out as well for Bruges. So he's one of their centre-backs, one of their better centre-backs as well. And when we look at Azmoun and Zuba, we're slightly concerned about having an inexperienced centre-back up against those two. Especially Zuba, he's like one of my favourite players. So I'm a bit concerned for them on that front. But Diatta for us, I'll say, I'll represent them for the moment. I think he'll be their main threat in this game.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned that about Zuba. We often kind of anachronistically and unfairly called Zuba a little bit of a blunt instrument at times. He does have the talent beyond that, but his sheer power, presence, and know-how, both back to goal, and his sheer ability to find a player in an area, especially like Azmoun, that they play off each other so well. It's that typical old school, even 90s big man, little man combination that just works very well. And on Zhirkov, ironically, he's actually been playing probably some of the best football since he was at Siska. Before he's moved to Chelsea. He's kind of, he doesn't have pace. I mean, anybody with pace will give him a bit of a difficult time, but he does that old Gary Neville trick of staying parallel with his man, getting tight, and instead of trying to compete for pace, he just uses his know-how and his positioning to kind of negate the pace a lot of the time. That being said, in the recent Spartak game, Roman Zobnin tore him apart, and he's very fast. So you're not quite sure which Zhirkov you'll get. The one that's seeing a wonderful twilight towards the end of his career, or the one that should already be in an old people's home in Moscow. So whichever would probably be one of the big reasons as to where the game goes in the end. Now, if you mentioned quite a few Bruges players there, but from the outside looking in, one of the most recognisable names is probably fair to say is that of the goalkeeper Simon Mignolet. Of course, for the RFN listeners, he came through as St. Truden before moving to Sunderland, where he was a rock between the sticks, to be frank, and had a highly successful spell, which earned him a £9 million move to Liverpool in 2013. Now, Mignolet's time with the Reds was mixed at first. He had quite a few high-profile mistakes, which caused him to fall out of favour. So how has Mignolet fared back in his homeland, back playing week in, week out for Bruges?
Yeah, he's been solid. He's been really, really solid, actually. I think definitely helped being at a side as dominant as Bruges. So he hasn't got like tons to do during matches, but when he's been called upon, he's been good. He's been really, really solid. He's actually been starting. Obviously, watching the England game the other day, you saw him. Like a friend of mine was like, "Are they really still playing Mignolet? Like, why is he still playing?" I was like, "No, he's been good. He's good." Like English, I know we kind of get this thing in English football where like if a player doesn't do well in like one game, like, oh, that's it, he's a flop. And I feel like Mignolet's kind of been put into that because he was at Liverpool and it's like that high profile. But I mean, he's done better than Karius did. He's done better than a lot of other keepers did. I think he's going to be. I probably should have added him into the key players as well, just because he is going to have a lot more work to do in the Champions League that he does in the domestic league. But I think for them, it's going to be really nice to have someone between the sticks like Mignolet, he's played at the high level. He can organise the defence. He can organise like the young players in the side as well, like the people look up to him. Like I said, he's in the national team and stuff. So yeah, no, he's been really successful in that first year back, and I think the move's probably benefited him quite a lot because, like you said, he just gets to play regular football. No one's really he's not gonna get dropped. There's no one that's really going to replace him in that sense. So it's kind of like a nice way into his twilight of his career. He's still only 32, so as a Football Manager fan, like he's reaching his prime. This is like the pinnacle of his Football Manager career. So yeah, I've been quite impressed with him. I'm glad he made the move. I quite like it when players do that. They go back to like their home country and play for one of the bigger sides and just kind of like enjoy less of the limelight. I guess there's less pressure on him, but yeah, he'll definitely be busy. That's for sure.
I must admit, I mean, as our listeners know, I am a Sunderland fan myself. So to see his struggles at Liverpool, where it was so high-profile mistakes, so many mistakes at the command of the area, it was surprising to see at the time, to be frank, because for us, he was Mr. Dependable. And everybody knows how crap we were when we were in the Premier League, the amount of shots we would concede every week and so on. He was a busy man, and he probably put his foot wrong once in 3.5 years. So I must admit, I was a little bit surprised, and I'm not at all surprised to see him just being that consistent presence, that calming presence at the back, because that's exactly what he was for us. And I 100% agree that a lot of other English fans, I mean, we probably are not guilty of this. We need to remember that life doesn't begin and end at the Premier League, and that other leagues and other countries do exist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got so many players on my list of like players that I rate who people think are absolute rubbish just because they didn't play well in like 5 minutes of a Premier League game. Or I'm a Reading season ticket holder, and you'll see a player come on and have a bad first touch, and the bloke behind you's like, oh, this guy's crap. He's rubbish. Get rid of him. It's like he's literally just come on. So yeah, that's definitely a bugbear of mine. And Mignolet, I think it's nice to hear, because if Sunderland fans still think of him quite highly, it'll just be the Liverpool fans potentially that don't rate him. But he's a good keeper. He's definitely a good keeper.
Yeah, of course. And to move away from slightly a lot less happy affairs, that here in Russia we dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic by briefly stopping play for a number of months, and then resumed at the end of June. All remaining games were played in 6 weeks, and then we had a 2-week break before the start of the new season. The fans were allowed in initially up to just 10% towards the back end of last season, and since August for the new season it's been up back to 50%. But I believe Belgium's dealt with the pandemic in a totally different direction.
Yeah, so Belgium pretty much shut the league down quite soon after the pandemic started to spread. And it was quite clear that Brugge had already won the league by then. So that wasn't really an issue. No one was kind of like debating that, because they usually go into like kind of like the Polish league and other sort of leagues do that, kind of like they split it, and then they have like the top half, bottom half, and they play off for like European places and stuff like that. But they just completely scrapped that this year. Last season, they were just like, there's no point doing that. Brugge have won the league, and the side at the bottom, Vazland, Beveren, were so poor that they were just like, okay, you're relegated. But then that caused so many issues, and that was an absolute cock-up nightmare of like them protesting, because they weren't actually that far away from being safe, despite being really, really poor. So for them, they were like, we could have stayed up. Like financially, this is important, blah, 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 blah. So eventually, the league decided, okay, you can stay. Then the two teams that were in the promotion race were like, okay, well, hang on, what's going to happen to us? Because I'm not going to dive into the wonderful world of the second tier in Belgium, but basically, if you finish first these are like last year's rules. If you finish first, you don't get automatically promoted. So they split it into 2 stages. If you win the first stage, you qualify for the playoff, and then the other team that wins the second stage also qualifies for the playoff. 2-legged affair, and only one of you will go up. So you could be the most consistent team and the best team, but finish second in both stages, and you just would never get promoted. So yeah, rant over about that. But yeah, so they had these two teams. Were then the day before they were meant to play the second leg, were told that they were both going to be promoted anyway. So we have these extra teams in the league, and it was just a complete nightmare. They'd already done the cup draw, so these guys are playing like the second tier cup draw thing. So it was a massive, massive mess in the end, and it culminated in, at the moment, Vazland I think they're second bottom, and they're just as bad as last season. And old guy on our podcast, Joris, is just like, he just calls them a waste of space. Basically, they just shouldn't be in the league. So that's kind of like how they dealt with COVID. So I think initially it was fine. I think everyone accepted Bruges were champions. The relegation was a complete mess. They restarted up again in August. We've now slowly seen fans reintroduced in September. So it's kind of a similar thing with like sort of like 10%, very few numbers. We had a couple of issues. I know you guys have had some issues with kind of the ultra groups and stuff. There were a couple of ultra groups for us that didn't. Like, I think the standard ultra groups were like, we don't want to come back until everyone can come back. A couple of other ultra groups just not wearing masks and doing all the singing. We had one game, I think, in the second tier where there was like a last minute goal and the players ran towards the fans and the fans ran towards the players and everyone was just in it together. And then a ridiculous one that I saw was another last minute goal for an away side in one of the games, and a fan like jumped over the edge of the stand to run at the player and shout at him for celebrating in front of the home fans.
Jesus.
I was just like, what is so it's been a bit mental, and at the moment cases are rising among teams, which has been a massive concern. So I'm not too sure really where we're going to go. I think there could be a couple of cancellations on the cards. I think there's one team that today announced they've got like 7 confirmed cases. So yeah, it's been an interesting one, that's for sure. I think every league's got its own like stories, but that's kind of like where Belgium is at the moment.
Yeah. It's interesting that cancelling the league caused as much of an absolute mess than playing on did. Of course, in Russia, we ended up having only a 2-week break. Players were in a bubble the entire time during that, and a lot of them haven't seen their families in months. We all, of course, had the well-documented case of Sochi defeating the Rostov kids 10-1 because their issues are so bad. Orenburg missing 4 games. Basically, the league shouldn't have restarted, but at the same time, it looks like it would have been an absolute mess just in exactly the same way had it been cancelled last season. We also have had the same issues with people not following the guidelines, not following social distancing, not wearing masks. I mean, any ultras area you will see, there's just zero social distancing whatsoever. It's absolutely jam-packed everywhere. And even just last week for the Zenit Spartak game, the big derby game, Spartak were investigated by the local health authorities for having what seemed to be above 50%, the upper limit. Anyone looking could see it was like 70 or 80%. It was almost packed in there. And in the end, they claimed that the attendance was 17,000 out of 44, which was just absolute BS, to be fair. Like it was well over that. And then it's resulted in a local health authorities investigation at the local district court in Moscow, in which Spartak only just avoided a potential up to 90-day stadium closure. So I guess what we're trying to say here, like a little way to finish off the questions, is that compared how the two countries coped, and that really there is no way to cope. It's just dealing with the hand the best that you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we want to move on to one last question, it's quite easy. It's very, very straightforward. Any bold predictions for the time next midweek?
I really wanted to say I think Bruges will win, but I just think Zenit were just going to be too strong for them at home. I think without Deli at the back, I'm worried about how they're going to deal with the strikers. If they sit in and counter and Diatta nicks them like an early goal, or they score the first goal, I think they could hold out for a point, but they really need to score first. I think that is like the key for them in this tie, because I think if they don't score first, they'll be up against it, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Does Zenit do have a little bit of an issue where they do tend to struggle to break down a packed defence? The only game they've lost this season was against Dynamo Moscow, who just sat back with 10 behind the ball. Loco sat back. Ural, they got a point away to Ural Ekaterinburg and the Ural Mountains, and once again it was a packed team. The only other game where anyone's took anything from them this season was Spartak, and it's the best 2 teams in the league, just going head to head in a very entertaining game. So if Bruges have got a very solid foundation and can hit on the counter, perhaps in behind Cherkov for these hip replacements, then something could happen. But I must admit, I do expect a Zenit win here, maybe 1 or 2 goals if Zuber and Azmoun are on form.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I think that is the way it's going to go. But I hope Bruges can surprise me. And Yeah, I'll be interested to see what they do on the weekend in terms of lineups and stuff and who they rest, because I think that will give an indication of kind of like what they're thinking about. Because I'm not sure if they'll run out with their usual lineup of attacking, trying to dominate the play, because I just don't think that's going to work, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure on that one either. I think Zenit will go into their game trying to dominate as they would. I think they will, to be quite honest, every game this in the group stages, even against Dortmund at home. That's just Zenit's game plan. That's how they always play. They've got that little bit of big club arrogance, and they do have it quite a lot, obviously, with Gazprom and the size of the club and the way they are in the modern era. It's the Zenit mentality, whether it's right or wrong. But once again, Ben, thanks for joining us. Everyone, if you go listen to the Belgian podcast for all your fix and all things Belgian football. Ben's any socials or Twitter accounts or any websites or anything you'd like to promote?
We've got a Twitter account. So if you search for the Belgian Football Podcast, you will find us on there. Personally, I write for Total Football Analysis and a couple of other websites and stuff. So you can always find me. I'm at benjack94. So yeah, if you fancy listening to a bit more about Belgian football, please do check us out. We only started a couple of months ago, so we're all relatively fresh and new to this thing. So any sort of feedback, new listeners, will definitely be appreciated.
So Ben predicts a tough group and a tough game on Tuesday for Bruges. Richard, how do you see this one panning out? Any predictions?
Me and predictions, eh? Oh God. Well, for starters, Zenit definitely have to win this game if they're going to have any chance of getting through to the last 16 of the Champions League. Then they're going to have to win this game. It's at home, so hopefully it can act as motivation to get their campaign off to a good start. I have a feeling that they might win this one. I mean, I know Zenit have not been brilliant in Europe recently. However, this definitely is an opportunity, isn't it? First game in the Champions League at home against a side who I don't think are as good as either Dortmund or Lazio. Well, I think the Dortmund and Lazio are definitely a step above. So I think this is an ideal opportunity for Zenit. Quite interesting couple of absentees though. I read Malcolm's going to be injured for this game, the game against Sochi at the weekend in the league, and then the game after Bruges. So it'll be interesting to see how they tactically adapt to that one. And most notably, Douglas Santos is suspended for this game. So they're the two big question marks at the moment. But yeah, I think Zenit will have enough at home. And I'm going to start the Champions League qualification campaign regarding my prediction for the first game in the Champions League qualification campaign. I'm going to say a 2-1 win for Zenit, I think is my prediction.
Nice. I think that's what I went for with Ben as well. And David, how about you?
Do I have to give a scoreline? I think Zenit will win.
That's fine.
Malcolm's not been in the best of form anyway of late. He's not scored for like 8 games, I think. I don't. Drewsy's still out as well, so they've been missing him more than I thought. So it'll be interesting to see how they get on without the both of them. Especially now they got rid of Rigoni as well. They're going to have to rely on Mostovoy and Yorokin probably, I guess, as their attacking midfield pair. So they're going to have a bit less to them than normal. But Juba on his day, obviously Juba and Asmoon on their day should be enough. So I fancy him to maybe win 1 or 2-0.
And then, of course, later on in the week, we've got not just Zenit playing, but on Tuesday, Stade Rennais versus Krasnodar in the Champions League Group E. On Wednesday, Loco are away to Red Bull Salzburg in Group A. And then on Thursday, our only Europa League side, Siska, are away to Austrian Wolfsburg. Not to be confused with the German Wolfsburg. So, Richard, scorelines, no. Results, we'll go results. But any predictions for these?
I'll try and be optimistic with Krasnodar, even though they're stuttering a bit in the league at the minute. I'll be bold and predict 1-1. I'm probably going to have egg on my face at the end of this, but I'll be bold and predict 1-1 against Rennes. Lokomotiv, I really don't hold out much hope for them. I suspect I'm not the only one here. I think Lokomotiv will lose 2-0 against Salzburg away. It's a very tough. Well, all the games are tough in that group, but Yeah, I can't see Lokomotiv doing anything. I've zero faith in them, unfortunately. CSKA against Wolfsberger. They're actually quite. They shouldn't be underestimated, Wolfsberger, because it's worth remembering that the Austrian sides have been doing very well in Europe recently. Actually, if they carry on this current trajectory, they could be ranked 6th in Europe in 3 or 4 years, jumping both the RPL and Portugal. So, it's not just Salzburg who are picking up points for them. The sides are improving, and I think Wolfsberger actually beat Mönchengladbach last year in the Europa League. So they're certainly not in one of their group games. So they're certainly not a side who can be underestimated. I'll go with a very narrow CSKA win, 2-1 away from home against Wolfsberger, but they're a bit of an unknown commodity, so I'm taking it with a pinch of salt because you just never know. And CSKA didn't do very well last year in Europe either, but I will back them to just get the job done.
And David, how about yourself? Do you think any of the Russian sides will get the win?
I think CSKA are being on good enough form that they should win. They've been playing pretty well of late. The squad's pretty strong. Everyone's largely fit, apart from Diveev, although Diveev did play again over the international break, so maybe he'll be back in time. Vlasic is on cracking form for club and country. So I think as long as he's on it, they'll be all right. Loco, I think I'm with you guys on that one. The less said, the better. And then Krasnodar, is Krasnodar at home or away? Sorry.
Away to start Rene.
Tricky. I'm just hoping they don't embarrass themselves. We want Krasnodar to do well. It's their debut season in Europe. We know they can do well. Rennes are a bit of a gap in my knowledge, other than the fact that I knew they were top of the league not that long ago, or maybe they still are. 1-1 does seem like a nice, safe option to go for. So let's just say a Krasnodar win then.
Yeah, I'm not going to be as optimistic, to be frank. I think Loco will lose and probably not score. I think Krasnodar will lose and probably will score. Rennes, you are right. Rennes are still joint top with Lille and have unbeaten in 6. Krasnodar been pretty poor recently, in my opinion. CSKA, though, I do agree, David. I think they'll win against Wolfsburg away, and they have to be frank. With if they have any hopes of getting out of the group with other games like Feyenoord and so on, quite difficult games. But CSKA have the quality to do so. I think I agree. Vlasic and Chidera Ejuke are going to be pretty instrumental in this campaign, and I think that's why they signed Ejuke for the money, is for the European success. So a move back to the RPL. There's been a new managerial appointment that was just announced earlier on today, I believe. It was yesterday. Sorry, it was yesterday. In Sandro Schwarz, the 41-year-old German. Now he is the former Mainz manager, and also managed the farm club Mainz 2 before that. Current Dynamo sporting director Zelsko Buvac was his assistant manager at Mainz when Schwarz played as a player under Buvac and Klopp. And it's one of those where Buvac clearly won the battle versus the board and who they wanted to take over from Kirill Novikov. Buvac wanted Schwarz, his hand-picked man from his former club in the league that he knows a hell of a lot about. The board wanted Berdiev, the safe option. The Russian Allardyce sort that defence out, get them playing to their potential. Now, Richard, how do you see this one going? And obviously, Buvac won out in the end in this battle with the board.
Well, yeah, I'm still pleasantly surprised at this because I really thought when Berdiev's name was being mentioned that, once again, I thought the Dynamo board had won out, like what we were saying on last week's pod. It was a similar situation to what happened at Spartak when the Spartak board wanted Cherchesov and Thomas Zorn, the old sporting director, wanted Tedesco. Zorn won that battle, and it's been onwards and upwards for Spartak ever since. Tedesco's really come on leaps and bounds this year. So, this is a big show of faith in Buvac by going for his pick, and the fact that Buvac was able to convince Dynamo's, conservative board to make this decision, I think is a real coup. I've been having a look at Schwarz, actually, and there's a brilliant piece on him from his time at Mainz on a site called Total Football Analysis. You should Google Sandro Schwarz Total Football Analysis, and you should be able to find it. He was in charge at Mainz between 2017 and 2019. He was in charge for the entirety of the 2017-18 and 2018-19 Bundesliga seasons. And in 2017-18, they came 14th out of 18. And in 2018-19, they came 12th out of 18 in the Bundesliga. Just a couple of points. I've read through that article on Total Football Analysis, by the way. Just a couple of points to pick up from Schwarz. His sides try, if possible, to play it from the back. However, they can also use long balls to the fullbacks if risks are too great from playing out from the back. Once they manage to find the central defensive midfielder, the fullbacks then have full license to get forward and attack. There did seem to be at Mainz an emphasis on midfield superiority, flooding the central midfield areas and pressing up with high fullbacks. And his preferred formation is a 4-3-1-2 formation. So I think Dynamo do have a decent chunk of personnel to fit into that formation if he decides to play it. But I think Lezovoy could be the attacking one behind the front two. You could pair Komlichenko up with another striker, possibly Clinton and G, possibly Gruliov. I think Szymanski, Morrow, and Fomin make a decent midfield three. So there's definitely the personnel there. And Skopintsev on one side is a good attacking fullback. They probably need a right back before the window shuts. So there is the personnel at Dynamo to fit that formation should he choose to go with it. This has a Tedesco style appointment written all over it, really, because if you think about it, Tedesco had a good first season at Schalke, then was sacked the following year, and now he's rebuilding his reputation well at Spartak. And it was kind of the same with Schwarz. There was decent first year, better second year, disappointing third year, but he should not be written off after one poor year. You shouldn't do that with any coach. So I'm quite excited about this, actually. I think it's a progressive move by the Dynamo board. It's definitely, I'm more enthusiastic about this now than I would if Kerben Berdiev had got the job. I think Berdiev at 67, far too old now, and I think this is a good move. And one last thing I will say is okay, he did end up getting dismissed by Mainz, Schwarz. But when you think about it, really, with Mainz, they've only been a Bundesliga club very recently. I think they only reached the top flight under the management of Klopp and Buvac in 2004-05. I think was their first season in the top flight in Germany. So they're not really a big club. I mean, off the top of your head, you can probably name 12, 13 Bundesliga clubs more historical and much bigger than Mainz in size. Just off the top of my head, I can name them. Some of them in the second tier, like Hanover and Hamburg, for example. So, really they're punching above their weight, finishing even, 10th or 11th in the Bundesliga. Mainz punching well above their weight. So, Frankfurt are a much bigger club and they're right next door to them. So, yeah, I mean, okay, he got sacked by Mainz, but Schwarz, but it's going to happen at these smaller clubs. Managers are going to come and go. They're never going to be consistently overachieving, barring, absolute miracles with transfers. So, no, I think this is a positive move, and hopefully he'll do very well. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can bring to Dynamo.
Yeah, I likewise echo those thoughts, and it's interesting to hear you bring the parallels, obviously, to Tedesco. It's quite difficult not to see that going towards the German route. Ironically, exactly a year to the day since Spartak appointed Domenico Tedesco. Now, David, what do you think about the Berdiev rumours? Now, of course, famous for his time in Russian football, won the league with Rubin, highly successful in getting Rostov to the Champions League. Do you think that Berdiev could have been a good choice at Dynamo Moscow?
Well, firstly, I'll just come back and say on Schwarz. He's got two assistant coaches with him, one of them being Andrei Voronin, obviously played for Dynamo in the past. But I did notice that both he and Voronin were teammates for Mainz for 3 years early in Voronin's career. So they know each other from their playing days. So that will be an interesting link up there between the two. And you'd hope that Voronin will sort of help Schwarz adjust to life in Russia, which would be good. I do wonder whether the Berdiev stuff was it ever actually true. Berdiev has a whole set of coaching staff who follow him to every club he goes to. He's got a very select group that he uses. He would demand probably he's very picky over players. As we know from his time in Rubin, you had guys like, I remember an interview with Moritz Bauer, where Bauer came off half time on like a training game. Berdiev said, right, here's 14 incidents where you were completely out of position. And, you can't imagine Berdiev coming in to a club like Dynamo who are trying to progress and to take them to the next level. I think I suspect we probably won't see Berdiev manage ever again. He would need a very specific set of conditions to manage at any football club. It needs to be a smaller club who he can implement his tactics well with, and he needs to have players there who he will trust to do that. He depends very highly on one specific type of playmaker, which for most of his career was Christian Neboa. He took him everywhere he possibly could, and was very successful whenever he did take him. So I don't think it would have worked if it was true, and I suspect it probably wasn't necessarily true. It's a punt to go on Schwarz. It's a guy who's going to have to adapt completely to a new culture. I linked to a video of him trying to speak Russian beforehand, which wasn't completely reassuring, especially considering he was meant to be reading it out and he still pronounced some words wrong. So we'll see how he gets on. Considering how well Tedesco, obviously Tedesco's a polyglot already. He could speak English, German, and Italian. So presumably picking up a new language for him wouldn't be so difficult. Schwarz seems to be German speaking only, and even his English seemed sort of a bit shaky on the video that I saw. So I think it's a risky one, to go for it just because he's German, just because he's foreign, or is there something else to him that Buvac knows? We'll have to see. It's going to be a tough job this year for him.
Yeah, I also, to be quite honest, always been quite sceptical over the Berdiev rumours. Berdiev's famous, as you rightly mentioned, is for his total control that he demands in every aspect of the club, from control of transfers to the nitty-gritty in the training ground to imposing a style of how the team plays. Now, that simply, why would Dynamo go for that when they've already implemented Zelsko Buvac? They put a lot of money and time into getting Buvac. It took a very long time and a lot of negotiating, and they've given him full control. So why would he then suddenly take it away? It just didn't make any sense in the short nor the long term. And then even when you do say hire Berdiev, then it's just exacerbating the problems that you had under Kirill Novikov, where everything's just far too defensive, not getting the best out of these flashy, these solid attacking players. There is no issues with Dynamo's defense. There is no issues with their compactness, their organisation, and that's what you get from Berdiev. Of course, he was much more than that in his Rubin days, the first time, but the second time, he really wasn't. I don't know do you want to come in here, Richard, on Berdiev and Schwarz?
Yeah, just to emphasise what we're saying there, I really just don't think Buvac and Berdiev would have got on. I really think it would have been difficult because you bring Buvac in for this, and then all of a sudden you give a manager like Berdiev the reins, and then he suddenly starts wanting control. Buvac might start suddenly thinking, well, what have you brought me here for then? It's So no, I think Buvac and Berdiev would not have gotten on. It would have been interesting to see if there was any truth to that. Maybe it was just one or two sections of the Dynamo board, maybe just panic searching, if such a phrase exists, trying to pick someone out right who's available to take over from Novikov. But whether it really got any further than just a suggestion is open to debate. But yeah, I totally agree. I don't think him and Buvac would have got on at all. So I think this is a sensible move. It's still a gamble, but I think an educated gamble to go for a young foreign manager in Schwarz. So we'll have to see how it goes.
Yeah, that's probably exactly why. It's easier to go with what you know. And Dynamo deserve every little bit of credit in at least trying to go for something different. Whether or not it'll work out, we'll wait and see. And that spells the end of this week's RFN podcast. Of course, check the site for all the latest on the goings on in Russian football. In the next week, we're going to have full previews in depth of all of the 4 upcoming European games. And then, of course, over the weekend, Dynamo themselves play CSKA in the latest Moscow derby. David, where can everybody find yourself online?
You can find me on Twitter at RFN_David.
And Richard?
You can find me at RichDPike89, at RichDPike89. There'll be some pieces for myself coming out for RFN soon. There's something that Smaddy's I've got in the pipeline, and I'm also a writer for some other sites too, so please do check out my work.
That's been the RFN Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет с ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.